Welcome to the How HR Leaders Change the World podcast. I'm your host, Cecilia Crossley, and each week we explore how the work of HR leaders is also creating positive social change, contributing to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, goals which the world's companies are increasingly understanding the urgency of achieving and investing in the action required. If you'd like clear, actionable ideas for how you can use the power of your role to affect change in your company, you're in the right place. Following a corporate upbringing, I founded the social enterprise From Babies with Love. We provide services to HR leaders, and through this work, I realised that HR professionals and social entrepreneurs are working in the same areas, albeit in different ways. So we created this podcast to share knowledge on steps we can take through the work of HR. In my opinion, if you're an HR professional, you are also a change maker. And this podcast will provide you with examples of how. By sharing the successes of some of the world's most inspiring HR leaders, you can frame your work in the context of positive change, implement brilliant ideas, and feel absolutely wonderful about doing so. A very warm welcome to Geoff McDonald, former Global VP HR at Unilever and co-founder of the charity Minds at Work. Geoff, it's wonderful to have you here on How HR Leaders Change the World. And please may I ask you to introduce yourself for our listeners?
Yeah, Cecilia, thank you for having me. Wonderful to catch up and talk to you again after a good couple of months, I think. I remember us meeting up in Waterloo. How long ago was that?
Yeah, it was more than a couple of months. Time's been at a standstill. It was pre-pandemic for sure when we could sit together and have coffee.
Yeah. And so nothing's really changed in terms of the work that I've been doing, since I left Unilever. I often describe it as a journey that I'm on filled with a very deep sense of purpose. And that is to try and create workplaces all over the world where every single person in a workplace feels that they genuinely have the choice to just put their hand up and ask for some help if they're struggling with a common form of mental ill health. And, that journey started when I left Unilever at the end of 2014, co-founded Minds at Work, the charity, and now I spend most of my time campaigning, advocating, catalysing these conversations in workplaces so that people who are struggling and here we are talking this afternoon. As we talk, there are billions of people all over the world, billions, not millions, billions, who are struggling in silence. And that just doesn't seem right in the 21st century. So we should change it.
I couldn't agree more, Geoff. And thank you very much for that overview of your, esteemed career. And knowing a little as I do that of your role in being a really early advocate in this area and the topic of mental health, and creating the change that you did in the example of your work at Unilever and beyond. I'm really looking forward to listening to your examples of success today. And may I lead us into the first of our 5 questions, which is, as an HR leader whose influence creates social change, what do you feel has been your most impactful action to date?
Wow. My most impactful action to date, I think it was Ralph Emerson who once said, if you can just help one person breathe a little easier every single day, that is success. And, I think probably the most impactful action that I've played out, not only over the last 8 years since leaving Unilever, but also when I was a global VP for HR within Unilever, I think it was catalysing this conversation within Unilever around mental health and mental ill health. And I honestly believe that catalysing that conversation and getting that conversation going, I think many lives, many employees in Unilever over a period of time have felt that they can breathe a little easier every single day in being able to just put their hand up and ask for some help. So I think that's probably the most impactful. I mean, of course, there was, the kind of role that I had within Unilever around helping to archetype the transformation of Unilever as an organization with purpose at its core, and how that transformation has contributed to the overall success and enhanced performance of Unilever. So, yeah, I think, but I think in terms of really impacting people's lives, I think it's been about opening up the mental ill health conversation.
Thank you, Geoff. And may I take you back to the beginning of that journey when you were at Unilever and ask you what were one or two of the things that you did that you feel worked well that might encourage others to replicate in their own organisations if they're working on improving conversations about mental health in their own teams and companies?
Yeah, Cecilia, there are a couple of things here. The first is, that I was very, very ill with anxiety-fueled depression back in 2008 while I was working for Unilever. 4 years after that crucible moment in my life, I lost a very, very good friend to suicide. And the night he died, I decided that was not fair because he had not been able to have a conversation, whereas I'd been able to have the conversations. And I suppose that was the real catalyst. And if you said to me, what was it that I, as an HR person, was able to bring to this conversation to get it ignited, to get it happening within Unilever? I think the first was just my own lived experience. I think it was my vulnerability, being able to express and share my story and be vulnerable about what I had gone through, 2008, 2010, the loss of a very good friend. And so I think having had that own lived experience and bringing some vulnerability, because I'm at the time a very senior HR person in Unilever, I think that was very significant in allowing me to co-lead that journey back in 2013 in Unilever. I think the other important intervention was an external catalyst, was bringing an external catalyst into the organization to further catalyze that conversation. And, in my journey or on my journey, I have got to know Alistair Campbell very, very well. And bringing Alistair into Unilever and getting Alistair to come in and to share his story and that kind of external catalyst. And then finally, linking this desire to enhance the well-being of our employees to the purpose of Unilever. At the time, if you think about Unilever's purpose to make sustainable living commonplace, we were talking about, do you know what that meant? It meant improving the health and the well-being of 1 billion people in the world. It meant reducing our environmental footprint by half, water, greenhouse gases. It meant enhancing the livelihoods of millions and millions of smallholder farmers all over the world by making sure that all of our sourcing of raw materials came from sustainable sources. Now, if we had a sense of purpose, which is about enhancing the world's well-being, well, then what about our own people's well-being? And so therefore linking this desire to enhance the well-being of our own people and their mental health to the purpose of the organization, I think that, those three things, my lived experience, my ability to be vulnerable, an external catalyst, and then showing how the well-being, charity starts at home, Cecilia. Here we are wanting to improve the well-being of 1 billion people in the world. Well, what about our own people's well-being? And being able to bring some data to that conversation as well. I think that was really important, to bring some data and to show, what was the well-being of our people looking like in terms of long-term absence, et cetera, et cetera. So for me, those probably were the 3 or 4 key levers that I was able to use to really catalyze and ignite this conversation.
Brilliant. Thank you, Geoff. It's so useful to hear your recommendations on what worked well for you and could work well for others. And also, I love that you just so immediately connected employee well-being or people's well-being to the Sustainable Development Goals more broadly. Of course, Sustainable Development Goal 3 is well-being, but
Absolutely.
But I love that you connected the planet's well-being to our, at home individually, our well-being too. And of course, I know Unilever's purpose is clearly articulated and I believe embedded culturally across the global workforce, and perhaps there are other organisations that aren't there yet. But I really agree with what you're saying on that connection between the two and the impact on the individual. So thank you very much for sharing that. And also thank you for sharing your personal experience as well. It's much appreciated. And our second question is just to think a little more broadly. And we talk about, we explore an industry, a broader theme of an industry. So perhaps for consumer goods, if you wish, but also thinking of your work, leading minds at work, co-founding minds at work. What do you see as the most exciting opportunity for HR to change the world at the moment?
I'm going to be biased. Okay, I'm going to be biased in this response, but I'm going to describe it within the umbrella of the world of work in the future. So I think HR has a huge opportunity to really think very carefully about how we work in the future, and that work in the future, Cecilia, enhances our life. Do you know, in the last 8 years, as I've traveled the world and worked in different sectors and worked in different organizations all over the world, one of the saddest insights that I've had is that the most limiting resource that I see in workplaces today is the energy of people. People are frazzled. In fact, I just read a post on LinkedIn today around a company that has given all their employees a week off because they're all burnt out. I mean, why do we have to wait for employees to be burnt out before we then intervene? Why don't we create workplaces whereby people going to work, their lives are enhanced? Do you know, most workplaces I go into, people's lives are being diminished by going to work. Every bit of energy gets sucked out of them in the workplace. And if you don't believe me, read Jeffrey Pfeffer's book. Professor Pfeffer of Stanford University, who's written a book on dying for the paycheck. Dying, not thriving for the paycheck, actually dying for the paycheck. And so I think the opportunity that HR has, and I think the pandemic has actually provided this little window of opportunity. And that is, within the future of work, how do we create workplaces where by people going to work, their life is going to be enhanced? Where workplaces truly, truly, truly see the well-being and the health of their people as a strategic priority. And I think HR has got a critical role to play in helping executive teams and organizations elevate the most important enabler of individual, team, and organizational performance, the health of people. Because the pandemic has proved when we as a population are not healthy, look what happens. Look what happens to the world. Productivity, to industries, to livelihoods. And so if the health, the well-being of our people is so important and is such a critical enabler to the success of an organization, why is it not a strategic priority? Why is it just a well-being week that we have once or we have a mental health awareness week, or we have a World Mental Health Day, and it's only at that time do we show any care? So under the umbrella of the future of work, how does the HR function truly, truly lead forward, together with the CEO, in creating a workplace where people's lives are enhanced? And you know why I believe that is so possible? Work gives you a sense of purpose, Cecilia. Work gives you a routine every single day. Work gives you the opportunity to build relationships with some wonderful people. Work gives you a sense of feeling part of a community. I mean, these are all life-enhancing aspects. Yet somehow, over the years, we've created workplaces that suck every bit of energy out of people. And they are diminishing people's lives. And so I think the opportunity for HR into the future, under the umbrella of the future of work, is how do we create workplaces that truly enhance the lives of every single employee in that workplace.
How HR Leaders Change the World is brought to you by From Babies with Love, and this episode is sponsored by our very own parental leave gift service. We help solve the challenge of connecting with colleagues across parental leave and in returning to work, contributing to talent retention and so too gender balance strategy. From Babies with Love donates 100% of its profits to orphaned and abandoned children. Your beautiful, sustainably sourced From Babies with Love gifts come with the story of how your company is also helping a less fortunate child, creating meaningful engagement. We transform spend that so often already takes place on flowers or products that don't have the Sustainable Development Goals at their heart. We transform that spend to become a consistent, inclusive and strategic part of your working parents programme. Ask us to tell you more at frombabieswithlove.org. Make an impact at a defining moment. Geoff, the way you describe your vision is so inspiring. It really is. And I was wondering if the chief executives that you speak to and the executives that you meet, do you feel they are bought into the vision you've just described and prioritising that and are excited by it as well?
Cecilia, it varies. It really, really does vary. And let me just give you a sense of what are the barriers to this? Why do I not see every CEO or CFOs or HR professionals' eyes light up when I describe that vision? Now, they might light up or they might not, but I think that there are maybe four or five factors that I think are inhibiting well-being and creating workplaces that truly enhance people's lives. The first one is that I don't think we've made the case at a truly emotional level for the link between well-being and employee performance. So we still have chief financial officers who kind of roll their eyes at the word well-being, some fluffy well-being thing that we're now talking about. Rather than, well-being, the energy of my people is the most critical enabler to their performance. And so let me listen. All right. So number one, it's not a strategic priority in most organizations. The second, Cecilia, barrier is that today there's no organization accountability to keep people healthy at work. There's lots of organization accountability to keep you safe at work. Think about the billions that get spent in health and safety. Well, it all goes to safety. It all goes to keeping people physically safe at work. Think about the capital expenditure budgets. Think about the investments. Think about the amount of money that is being spent on PPE in workplaces to keep people physically safe at work. Eh? Yet, there's no accountability to keep people emotionally and mentally safe at work. No organization accountability whatsoever. Look at if there's an injury in a workplace as a result of a safety blemish, there will be all sorts of reviews. There will be all sorts of investigations done if somebody is badly injured. Let there be a suicide at work as a result of workplace stress, and then we just recruit somebody else. The third reason why I don't think it really sticks is because there's no individual accountability. We haven't found ways to encourage individuals in the workplace to enhance the most valuable asset that they have, which is their well-being. And then finally, Cecilia, I think that, and I put myself in this, I put myself in this class once upon a time. I think most senior leaders in workplaces today think they are invincible. I think they are. They think they're invincible. And so why must I care about my own well-being? Because I'm invincible. And I often believe that if you can't care about your own well-being, you won't care about anybody else's well-being. And so I think, yes, there's a vision out there. Yes, there's this whole thing about enhancing the lives of people in the workplace and creating that kind of workplace. But I think there's some barriers that we need to overcome. Organizational accountability, individual accountability, elevating this to being a strategic priority because it's a critical enabler of performance, and finding a way to bring senior leaders on this journey of them beginning to realize the most valuable asset that they have, the most valuable asset they have is their health. And they are not invincible. I thought I was invincible. Well, guess what? I wasn't.
Geoff, you've just, there are so many follow-up questions I want to ask you now on, right, how do we get the data set that satisfies the chief financial officers? And how do we change the regulatory and legal framework in every country in the world to include liability or accountability for well-being alongside physical safety? And on. But we haven't got time. But my goodness, you just covered so many interesting points that, I guess the coordination of the entire HR profession to be inspired by and think about working on in their own, for themselves. So you mentioned the individual and what we can do for our own, taking care of ourselves and our own accountability before we even start on that for others.
But, I know this is to an HR audience, and I want to take the opportunity because it's, it's good. I mean, here I am sort of throwing out this challenge of make the well-being of your people a strategic priority. Imagine an employee value proposition which says, come and work for us because we'll enhance your life. Jeepers, how differentiating could that be? But the challenge to me is, okay, Geoff, what would that look like? So if we elevated the well-being of our people to being a strategic priority under this banner of the future of work, what would it look like? And I want to just share with you just some really practical thoughts on what I think that would look like. What would an HR function or a CEO need to take some accountability for and execute over a period of time? And there are a couple of things that I think would need to be done. The first thing, Cecilia, is that every organization should define for themselves their well-being framework. What does well-being mean for them? Physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, financial, what is it? But just develop a framework. Then go out and make sure that you are providing resources that employees can use to enhance every element of that framework, all right? Now, in the past, we've been good at physical well-being. We provided gyms in offices, ride-to-work schemes. We've done a good job at the physical level. But what about the emotional level? What about the mental level? What about that sense of purpose and meaning? So define the framework, put the resources in place. The second thing that I think we should be doing, and this is not in any particular chronological order, but every single workplace, if they are truly going to enhance the life of people, they've got to address the stigma of mental ill health in the workplace. They've got to go about, spend a year, 18 months, creating a psychologically safe workplace and get rid of the stigma of mental ill health. The third area is to relook our leadership behaviors. Relook our leadership behaviors in the organization. What are the behaviors we expect of our leaders? And introduce a behavior whereby we expect leaders to show compassion to themselves and to be looking after their own health and therefore the health of their employees. So a re-look around the leadership behaviors and what we value in terms of leadership behaviors within the organization. Audit the ways of working. Do an audit of the ways of working and try and understand what coming out of that audit, what ways of working do we need to change to reduce the levels of stress and anxiety that might be in the organization. And then finally, measure what we treasure, the well-being of our people. So let's have a well-being survey every second year. And people say to me, no, but we've got engagement surveys. And we ask a few questions around well-being in the engagement survey. That's not good enough. It's not good enough. There's no scientific basis to the responses that you get from that. And what I think we should be doing is 1 year we do an engagement survey. And you know why? Because engagement surveys measure your willingness to go the extra mile, your pride in the organization. Do you know what they don't measure, Cecilia? Is your capacity to go the extra mile, your ableness. And if you're not healthy, you can't. If you're not feeling energized and you've got good well-being, you can't go the extra mile as much as you might be willing to. And so let's put a measure in place. Let's measure the well-being of our organization. And then let's, using the data that we've got from the audit that we've done, from the resources that we've put in, the way in which we've encouraged people to have development plans around their own well-being, then in a year's time, let's see what impact that's had and what's been the return on the investment. So I think there are ways in which we can go about this. But sometimes the other real barrier, I think, to some of this stuff is, I say to organizations, do a survey of the well-being of your people. Do an audit of the ways of working. And a lot of senior leaders are fearful. They are fearful of seeing the results of these surveys. They are fearful of seeing the results which say the well-being of this organization is not good. It is sick. And by the way, there's high risk of burnout in that function and in that function and in that function. They are fearful because then they don't know how to respond. They don't know what to do about that. And that's where I think the whole well-being industry and some of the consulting firms out there should be preparing themselves to be able to provide support to organizations in this particular space.
Geoff, that was such a useful summary of breaking down some of the activities that people who are listening to you and feeling inspired and think, well, right, where do I start? How do I go about it? That was a very clear roadmap of action that is puttable on a to-do list, practical as well as the theoretical in terms of the principles you outlined. Thank you so much for talking through that. And Geoff, I'd like to now ask you, thinking more about your personal experiences and interests, an area of social or environmental injustice that you're passionate about, which you've talked about a little already, but there may be something else you'd like to discuss too and share today. But is there a particular area that you're passionate about and where you've seen your role as an HR leader is giving you the chance to create change?
Yeah, Cecilia, I mean, the injustice for me is not being able to bring my whole self to work. So we talk about diversity and inclusion. Well, how inclusive are you as an organization if I'm not feeling well mentally or emotionally, I don't think I can put my hand up and ask for help? That is an injustice. That is an injustice. That is, if somebody had a physical ailment, they'll put their hand up and ask for some help, and they will get the help that they need. It's an injustice that because I might be struggling mentally or emotionally, I don't think I can ask for some help. It's an injustice that some people are ill. They are struggling in silence. And you know what's happening? Their performance is dropping. But they are fearful of trying to explain why their performance is not what it should be because they're struggling mentally or emotionally. And you know what then happens? Is they get fired. They get fired because they're too scared to talk about their mental and emotional struggles. That is an injustice. It's an injustice. And that's what I'm fighting. That is what I am fighting to change. That is what I'm fighting to change. To give every single person all over the world that sense of freedom, that sense that, you know what, I've genuinely got a choice here to just put my hand up and ask for some help. And I know that I'll get a compassionate and an empathetic and supportive line manager who is going to help me to recover and to return to work and to flourish, just like if I was struggling with a common physical ailment.
Geoff, thank you so much for the passion that you bring. Like, you can hear it in your whole being, not just your voice. And it's truly inspiring. And it leads me immediately onto our next question, because that is around inclusion, which we like to hone in on, but particularly thinking about your experience at Unilever and the CFOs that you mentioned before when you're talking to the executive committees, perhaps the less engaged ones, let's say. And am I right in thinking that you had great success over a period of time at Unilever in creating that environment you just described, where there was greater equity between those suffering from an emotional or mental period of unwellness in comparison to physical, that they were able to have a conversation and get the help they needed and continue to flourish. And you were able to show that that work and that program of change absolutely contributed to the financial or other commercial business goals at Unilever, that there was a very clear ROI that came about.
Cecilia, I'm not sure I can claim any kudos for that. I mean, because I began this conversation in 2013, mid-2013, together with a guy called Tim Munden, who was the head of HR in the UK at the time. He's now the chief learning officer within Unilever. And we piloted this work in the UK over the first sort of through until the end of 2014. I actually left Unilever mid-2014. And so did not and have not seen the complete benefit of the work that we began back in 2013. But I do know, when I talk to Lena Nair now, who's the Chief HR Officer at Unilever, or to an Alan Jope, I mean, they will say that the return on the investment around getting after and enhancing the well-being of their people has been in the region of 1 to 6. So for every pound that they've spent, they've had up to almost £6 return. And that return has come through being a more attractive place to work, more engaged employees, being able to further retain employees, being able to, have employees that are at work feeling well and healthy, and therefore has enhanced their productivity and their overall performance. And so I think it's been part of Unilever's transformation as an organization and the improved performance. It's not been the only thing. It's absolutely been part of that. And, they have definitely seen a significant return on the investment, over the last 6 or 7 years.
Thank you, Geoff. That's such a powerful example. You mentioned earlier the importance of data in ensuring that wellbeing is a strategic priority for executive boards. And of course, that's just one example, but it's the start of a bigger evidence base and data set that those numbers you just shared are so powerful in giving an example. And finally, Geoff, we love to leave our listeners, who I have no doubt are feeling inspired by you, with something that they could really put into place in the near future for their teams or for their companies in their own work. And so it's to ask you if there was just one specific action that you would like to see all HR leaders and all HR professionals take to make a positive change for the world. What would that be?
Do you know what I would like to see? I would like to see every single HR professional role model what they do to maintain the most valuable asset that they have, their health. Because I honestly believe that if we as an individual, if every single HR leader out there in the world prioritized their own health and their own well-being, they made it the most important priority in their life, and they cared for it as a result, I think they would then be on a journey to be able to create an environment that enhances the lives of every single employee that works in their organization. But I think it starts with them, and it starts with them role modeling and talking about the things that they are doing to enhance and to protect the most valuable asset that they have. I often say, Cecilia, and maybe we can end on this, make time for your wellness. Because if you don't, you might one day be forced to make time for your illness.
Thank you so much, Geoff. You say to end on this note, but I actually feel like we're going to have you back regularly to go through episode by episode to have enough time. Like everything that you just covered. I mean, we've just raced through, my mind is whirring with the image you've just set about the future of work and the role of wellness within that. And not having a wellbeing week anymore. I mean, imagine, we'll get there, I'm sure. But I really appreciate everything that you've just shared and the time you've taken to be with us here. Thank you so much for joining us on How HR Leaders Change the World.
Thank you, Cecilia, and thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of How HR Leaders Change the World. Thank you for tuning in. If you have a moment to leave a review, a 5-star one please, that would be a huge help to achieving our goal to reach more of your peers, so we can all contribute to further and faster positive change. For your copy of the show notes, head to frombabieswithlove.org, where you can also join the How HR Leaders Change the World mailing list, and make sure you don't miss out on future episodes and bonus materials. And for harnessing the power of your role to create positive social change, I'm sending you a jumping up in the air virtual high five. See you next time on How HR Leaders Change the World.